Hey guys, how's it going? Thanks for watching today's video. Today I'm going to be talking about the House forecast and more specifically each party's path to winning a majority in 2020 in the House of Representatives, and at the end I'm going to give a general prediction that I have for the House of Representatives. Right before I get into that, I'm trying something a little different here today, so my face will not be in the video. It is just going to be me voicing over. However, the general material shouldn't change too much. So if we look at the screen right now, Democrats currently have a 92.5% chance at winning an outright majority, and they're projected to win around 233 seats. Meanwhile, Republicans only have a 7.5% chance at winning a majority, and they are projected to win 201 seats. All these city areas that Democrats are gaining in is really because of this suburban exodus from the Republican Party because of Donald Trump's unpopularity among college-educated voters. So right now, if we look at the projected breakdowns of the House, Democrats have clearly the majority of this kind of bell curve here. It isn't unreasonable to say that Republicans could win the House back in 2020. However, Donald Trump would have to do extremely well because the House of Representatives is very influenced by presidential elections. And right now, the congressional ballot is not looking extremely strong for the Republican Party. However, we'll get to that later. Right now, what I want to focus on is this electoral college map. And all the districts that are real toss-up districts are going to be bolded. I really want to talk about the ones in New York and also Texas and Georgia and all these sort of Sunbelt states. So toss-up districts in the Sunbelt states are going to be very hard for Republicans. I will go into where the Republicans are weak right now in the House of Representatives election in a little bit, but just generally, the Sun Belt is trending towards the Democratic Party. So in 2020, it's going to be a little more blue than it was in 2018. In Texas, I do think that the Republican Party will have the ability to make up for some losses. There was an extremely strong Senate candidate, and it's not looking like the Senate race in Texas is going to have as high of a turnout, and it doesn't look like Biden will have quite as high of a turnout in Texas in 2020. So I do think that in a state like Texas, Republicans could make up some lost ground. Additionally, in Oklahoma, they could also make up some lost ground. So some of these fringe districts that Democrats were just barely able to win in 2018, I think that they could definitely make up. However, there are also a lot of districts which are trending blue very quickly. In Georgia, the 6th and 7th congressional district are trending blue at a very rapid pace. Now, moving on to another region to talk about is New York. So New York is a state that it's a very solid blue state just because of the New York metropolitan area. However, upstate New York is kind of a toss-up. Republicans should be able to sort of dominate in those areas that don't have a lot of population growth, have a large amount of middle class, white, non-college educated union workers, this and that. Key demographics for the Republican Party. However, they lost some of these districts in 2018. You can see the highlighted districts in New York, and they should be able to capitalize off of it. But this is where some of the weakest parts of the Republican Party come into play. They have had real issues recruiting candidates for the 2020 congressional race. There are some districts that just don't even have any challengers that were able to fundraise over $50,000 without self-funding, like in Utah's 4th and also in New York. Anthony Brindisi is in a district that Donald Trump won by a very sizable margin, but he doesn't even have any strong competitors. So in a district that Republicans should be able to take back, they are failing because they have not been able to recruit strong candidates. And that is why the Democrats, I think, are just going to run away with this congressional race because the door is not closed for the Republican Party. There is still the potential for them to do well. Donald Trump could improve in the polls. They could improve in the congressional ballot polls. However, they have really lacked in fundraising. They have really lacked in recruitment. And in a time when Democrats are making gains in online fundraising and they have a very popular national identity, this is a very crucial time for Republicans, and they kind of need to get their grasp on it. We'll get more into that later. So right here, you can see there are not that many competitive races. Between the 70% of a Democratic win and the 70% of a Republican, there's only a handful of congressional districts. And this is really where the balance is going to lie. And Democrats, they do have more safe districts than the Republicans. So they don't need to they're going to be playing more defense in 2020, and Republicans are going to be playing offense. However, Republicans are not in a shape to do that. we can see the Democrats, their chance at winning the majority is going up. As polling on the congressional ballot is increasing, it's now at around 8 points. So 8 points ahead. This is similar to 2018 margins. Democrats are now overwhelmingly ahead of Republicans, and it's not looking like there's going to be enough time for Republicans to take that back. Democrats aren't above 50%. If Democrats were above 50%, it would kind of be game over for the Republican Party. However, Republicans definitely need to get their act together if they want any shot at winning a majority. Right now, they're probably going to have to just do damage control and try and keep as many seats or fight back for as many seats as they possibly can, because it's looking like Democrats are going to have another really strong year. Moving into presidential polling. So the House of Representatives, unlike the Senate, is definitely very influenced by the presidential elections. Well, you could say that this year a lot of Republican candidates are trying to link their campaign to Donald Trump, so it might be a little different in general. However, the president does, the congressional candidate will kind of follow suit. And then in a midterm election, it might go the opposite way. So we saw in 2018 that the Democrats did really well because Donald Trump was in office and he was unpopular. In 2020, it's looking like Donald Trump is going to remain unpopular. Biden ahead by 9 points, kind of a similar margin that the congressional ballot is at. And Democrats are probably going to be able to do really well if Biden's able to keep this up. So if we look at how the presidential popular vote goes and how the House popular vote goes, it's looking like a pretty strong correlation. So as the presidential popular vote is at a +8, the House will be at +11. That is on this graph. If the Republicans want any chance at winning a majority in the House, Donald Trump will definitely need to increase his ballot, because it would be extremely unlikely that Republicans would be able to take a majority without Donald Trump doing well. Now, there is this phenomenon of like split ticket voting, where people will vote for a Democratic president and a Republican congressional candidate if they want to try and balance the parties in power. However, that is on the decline, and single party voting, straight down ballot voting is definitely on the rise in 2020 as things just become a lot more divided in the nation. This is just another look at congressional polling in another way. We saw in that chart before that Democrats were ahead around 8 points, and this is just a look at the individual polls. Looking at this map, this is just another projection that we saw from the first one that labels some toss-up districts that Democrats and Republicans are going to be going after. If you take a look at the blue bar at the top, Democrats in this projection already have an outright majority. So even if Republicans win every single one of these toss-up districts, which I can tell you right now would be extremely unlikely, just looking at Iowa itself, all three of these districts are actually leaning in favor of the Democratic Party. And if Republicans are not winning on the congressional popular national vote, then they are probably not going to win any single one of these Iowa districts unless a Republican candidate is extremely strong in one of them. Another factor going into this that I want to talk about is the sheer amount of candidates that are retiring this year. So if you look at the dark blue districts, these are all the Democratic candidates that are going to be retiring this term. However, it is significantly overshadowed by the amount of dark red on this map, and that is signaling all the Republicans that are going to be retiring. There are a few in Texas. These people are retiring most likely because their districts are being challenged and they don't want to sort of lose the political capital they might have losing a congressional race. However, some of them, are just kind of old. They're retiring, but a lot of this is just because of how competitive the Democrats are making it in 2020, and they don't want to publicly lose. We can see that happening a lot in Texas. In Texas, 22nd in Texas is 23rd congressional district. We can see it happening in Georgia. I believe that is the 7th congressional district. We can see that in Virginia. We can see a lot of this happening all across the map. The main point that I want to talk about is how Democrats have been extremely effective at fundraising, and why that is probably going to persist until the election. So if we just take a look at this map, Democrats have outraised Republicans in every single metric. They have outraised them in large donations. They have outraised them in political action funds. They have outraised them even in small individual donations. And that is because there is a lot of enthusiasm around the Democratic Party. But even more importantly, the Democratic Party has created an online fundraising machine that the Republicans are just not keeping up with. In 2020, Democrats are expected to have raised close to $3 billion from online fundraising, not just in congressional races, but in all sorts of races, in local elections, in funds for Democratic-leaning organizations and all this and that. Meanwhile, the Republican equivalent is only expected to raise a little less than $500 million. So that is 1/6 of what the Democrats are expected to raise this year. So obviously that is a huge problem for the Republican Party. Congressional campaigns cost a lot of money. Advertising is extremely important, and because there is not as much in-person campaigning going into this election season, that online fundraising is going to be extremely important, more important now than ever, and Republicans they don't have the online fundraising army that Democrats do, and that is definitely going to hurt them in 2020. So we're looking at how Democrats raised, spent, and have money on hand in the 2020 third quarter. So if you look at, again, all three metrics, they are winning. Not only have they raised and spent more money than Republicans, Democratic candidates still have cash on hand more than Republicans. And it's just going into that. They're only going to build that lead, that cash on hand. And this is endangered incumbents list. So basically any congressional candidate that they see as being threatened, a lot of those districts that we saw highlighted in the first map or the toss-up districts that we saw in a previous map, they're all on this list. And they have all raised... at least they all have $1 million in cash on hand at the start of April. And a lot of them only, okay, if you look at this, only 11 of their challengers had more than $500,000 in the bank saved. So that means that these congressional challengers had at least twice as much in every race, but 11 in these 42 races these are essentially the only 42 races that are probably going to flip. There might be a few upsets here and there, a few exceptions, but in general, these 42 are the ones that are at risk at flipping. And again, fundraising is not everything. However, it is extremely important. It's a really strong indicator of how popular the candidate is in this district, as well as how well the party is going to be able to campaign going into the 2020 election. They are definitely having the advantage. So now I just want to talk a little bit about my projections for the 2020 House. So right here we see that Democrats have 227 House districts while Republicans have 208. So I went a little easier on the Republican Party. I gave them some districts that I think they definitely have a shot at winning. So if we look at Texas, I'm just going to highlight Texas a little bit just because I'm from here. So, it's a little more relevant to me. But if we look at some of these Texas districts in the suburbs outside of Houston, they're definitely trending blue. However, I think that because Beto was such a strong candidate in 2018, people are definitely overestimating how blue these districts are trending. Even Lizzie Fletcher in Texas, 7th Congressional District, she's extremely vulnerable too. She has a very strong candidate that she is facing off against, and no metric has her in the toss-up category. So I definitely think that a lot of these congressional districts, Mike McCall, and I believe Texas's 22nd Congressional District, I think they are going to actually keep their seats. They could lose, but for the most part. Additionally, Gina Ortiz-Jones out here in West Texas, she is going to be fighting an extremely close race. I gave her the congressional district. I ultimately thought that she would win it. However, I could see it going both ways. So it's definitely there's going to be a lot of close races, but there's just so many close races that Republicans would have to win. And right now they are at such a polling and fundraising and recruiting disadvantage that I just don't see it happening for them. If we look over at Virginia, I gave Republicans a few districts in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Virginia, and then as well as in upstate New York, I gave Republicans a few districts, as well as in Maine's 2nd Congressional Districts. This is just because the Democratic Party did extremely well in 2018, and a lot of these states are going to be much more competitive, like in Pennsylvania and Virginia. Donald Trump has said that he is going to probably try and expand his battleground, and I definitely think because Virginia had been so blue in 2018 and 2019, flipping both House chambers, I do think that Republicans are going to have kind of a motivation to get out the vote. I don't think it'll be enough to flip Virginia, obviously, just because it's so far gone blue, but I do think that in some of these districts in southern Virginia that it could be a little more competitive. In New Jersey and Pennsylvania, these are states that or New Jersey at least is a state, as well as New York, that is solid blue, but some of these districts that are kind of either suburban, very wealthy suburban, or far outside of these city centers, I do think that they could go Republican just because they are not the traditional Democratic districts. In Maine's 2nd Congressional District, Donald Trump will probably campaign pretty heavily there. He was able to win it by very large margins in 2016, and in 2018, Democrats only won it by around a point or so. So I also gave that to them. In Iowa, I gave Democrats most of the districts. I gave them 3 out of 4, the 3 that they're all leading in polling. And this was just because Iowa is having a pretty strong Senate race. Donald Trump isn't polling exceptionally well there. And, it's about the same numbers, if not worse, than it was in 2018. In Georgia, I gave Democrats both the 6th and 7th congressional district. And this is just because Georgia is a state that's trending blue. In 2020, there's probably going to be a lot of turnout, especially in the Georgia metropolitan area and these suburban voters that are very crucial, and these southern suburban voters in a major metropolitan area. They're definitely going to come out in droves, that I predict, and that's why I gave 6 and 7 of Georgia to the Democrats. And then just looking out west here, it's kind of a mixed bag. I don't really know too much about these congressional districts. I do know that Oklahoma City's kind of a real surprise. That was one true upset. Kendra Horn won in Oklahoma City and was completely not expected to. I don't think she'll be able to repeat on that. She may be able to. Donald Trump probably isn't going to campaign extremely heavily in Oklahoma City, but he might put a little focus just to try and get that congressional district back. It's not out of the question. I mean, she did it in 2018, but I think it's unlikely it happens in 2020. In Utah, a similar story, definitely a more Democratic-leaning congressional district. Republicans have just been unable to put up a candidate who is competent in this congressional district, kind of similar to some districts across the country, so I think that Democrats are going to keep it. That is my prediction for the 2020 House of Representatives. I do think that Democrats are ultimately going to take it. I mean, their path to the nomination is essentially just defense. It's just keeping at least a fraction of what they gained in 2018, and they will hold on to a majority in the House.